October frost clings to Krakow's ancient stones. A silent cathedral that hasn't rung a bell in 300 years. A verger strangled with his own thurible cord. A saint's thumb bone vanished from its golden reliquary. An American heiress, a trembling priest, a forged passport, and one quiet English spinster who notices the single mink hair caught on a dead man's fingernail. 7 nights, 3 keys, 1 murder. Miss Marple has arrived, and the crypt is about to speak. Chapter 1. The Postcards from the Vistula. Miss Jane Marple had never contemplated Kraków until the postcard arrived. It depicted the Wawel Hill at twilight, the cathedral spires pricking a violet sky, and bore Mrs. Ariadne Oliver's scrawl. Come at once. The Countess has a palace, the pierogi are divine, and I need your eyes. A.O. Miss Marple, who disliked exaggeration in any form, weighed the invitation against the damp of an English November and the certainty of rheumatism. Curiosity, that most persistent of her vices, prevailed. She packed 1 modest suitcase, her grey knitting, and a small tin of digestive biscuits, and took the boat train to Warsaw. The Polish express from Warsaw to Kraków was heated by a stove that sighed like an elderly dowager. Miss Marple shared her compartment with a commercial traveller who snored through 3 provinces, and a nun who told her beads with the concentration of a banker balancing ledgers. At each station, platforms glittered with frost. Vendors sold hot borscht in enamel cups. Miss Marple sipped hers cautiously and reflected that travel broadened the mind chiefly by narrowing the arteries. Kraków greeted her with a wind off the Vistula, sharp enough to slice bread. The station clock showed 4, yet dusk already pressed against the windows. Countess Zofia Tarnowska waited beside a black Daimler, older than the Republic, its chrome dulled to pewter. She was tall, silver-haired, dressed in charcoal tweed that would not have disgraced a London square. Her handshake was firm, her eyes the pale blue of winter steel. "You are punctual, Miss Marple. In Poland, we value that almost as much as hospitality." She spoke English with the faintest trace of a Habsburg lilt, as though Vienna had lent her its vowels on permanent loan. The Daimler purred through streets where tram bells clanged like impatient chaperones. Gas lamps flickered on. Their reflections slid across the river in long gold ribbons. The Countess gestured toward the hill ahead. Wawel! Coronations, funerals, and every variety of intrigue. The cathedral has seen them all, and told none. Miss Marple observed the passing facades, Renaissance doorways, Baroque saints frozen in niches, and thought how much human nature resembled architecture. The same passions hidden behind different stone. Kanonicha Street was narrow, cobbled and silent, save for the echo of their wheels. The palace, 3 stories of mellow brick with a courtyard of linden trees, had belonged to the Tarnowski family since Sigismund Augustus lost a wager at cards. A footman in livery opened the door. Another took Miss Marple's coat with the reverence usually reserved for relics. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax and old leather. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver surged forward, voluminous in plum velvet, cheeks pink with excitement and Tokay. "Jane, you came. Zofia, isn't she exactly as I described? Small, lethal, and deceptively woolly." The Countess smiled. "Wool gathers no moss, Ariadne, nor, I suspect, does Miss Marple." Supper was served in a panelled room, where ancestors in armour glowered down. Bigos arrived in a silver tureen. cabbage, sausage, wild mushrooms, a whisper of juniper. Miss Marple ate sparingly. She had learned that heavy meals clouded deduction. The plum brandy that followed was another matter. It slipped down like liquid fire and loosened tongues. Conversation turned, inevitably, to the cathedral. The Countess set down her glass. They call it the Silent Cathedral because no bell has sounded since the Swedes melted them for cannon in 1655. The silence is watchful. Mrs. Oliver leaned forward. Sophia says the verger hears confessions in the crypt. Imagine! All those sins echoing among the bones of kings. Kazimierz hears nothing he does not wish to, the Countess corrected. He has kept the keys for 40 years. A thin man, all angles and devotion. He locks the grill at Compline and unlocks it before the first sparrow stirs. Miss Marple listened, needles clicking softly beneath the table. She pictured the verger, stooped perhaps, with the patient resentment of one who serves, but is never served. Such men noticed everything. After supper, the Countess proposed a turn through the cloisters. The moon is up. The cathedral wears moonlight better than incense. They crossed the courtyard wrapped in furs. The night air carried the bite of frost and the distant scent of the river. A side door stood ajar. Kazimierz himself admitted them, touching his cap. He was indeed thin, his cassock hanging like a shroud on a scarecrow. His eyes, small and black, flicked over the party and lingered on Miss Marple a fraction longer than courtesy required. The nave was vast, vaulted shadows swimming above pools of candlelight. Side chapels opened like dark petals. In the chapel of Sigismund, a single figure knelt. Father Stanisław, the confessor. He rose as they approached, cassock rustling, and made a small bow. His hands, Miss Marple noted, trembled even in repose, fine-boned hands that would fumble with a thurible chain. Father hears 4 languages, the Countess murmured, and forgets them all of the moment absolution is granted. The priest's smile was thin. Secrets are heavy, Countess. I lay them at the altar and walk lighter. Miss Marple studied the tremor, the flicker of candlelight on a bead of perspiration at his temple. Fear, she thought, or conscience. The two were often indistinguishable. They left Father Stanisław to his prayers. Kazimierz locked the grill behind them with a key as long as a man's forearm. The clang echoed, final as a judge's gavel. Back in the palace, Mrs. Oliver declared herself exhausted and retired to wrestle with a recalcitrant chapter. The Countess poured a nightcap of cherry nalevka. Firelight danced across her rings, sapphires dark as midnight. You will find us provincial, Miss Marple. Provincialism is merely specialization, Countess. Every village has its specialty in sin. The older woman laughed softly. Then Kraków specializes in silence. Tomorrow you shall meet the others, my house guests, my penance. An American heiress with the voice of a foghorn, her secretary who counts everything twice, a Viennese restorer who smokes like a factory, and an Englishman who believes the Middle Ages ended yesterday. They circle the cathedral like moths around a reliquary. Miss Marple sipped the nalevka. It tasted of summer orchards locked in glass. Moths burn easily, she observed. Upstairs, her room overlooked the vistula. Moonlight silvered the water. Somewhere a night bird called. She unpacked her knitting, laid out her tablets of aspirin and her small leather notebook. On the first page she wrote, in her neat spinsterish hand, Arrived Kraków. Cathedral silent. Verger watchful. Priest trembles. Countess hospitable but anxious. House party assorted. Motive as yet unknown. She underlined the last phrase twice, closed the book, and slept without dreams. Outside, the river kept its ancient counsel, and the silent cathedral waited. Chapter 2. The verger's key Miss Marple woke before the cathedral's first sparrow. The palace on Canonica Street lay hushed, its corridors breathing centuries of wax and wood smoke. She dressed with her usual precision, grey wool, sensible brogues, a cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother, and descended the marble staircase as quietly as a cat on carpet. In the entrance hall, a single lamp burned. The footman, dozing on a settle, stirred only when she unlatched the courtyard door. Frost silvered the linden leaves. The sky was the colour of tarnished pewter, and the air carried the bite of the river. Miss Marple crossed the cobbles, her breath pluming, and followed the narrow passage that led to the Wawel's postern gate. Kazimierz, the verger, was already at his post beside the iron grille, a lantern in one hand, the great key in the other. He touched his cap with the deference due to a guest of the Countess, but his small black eyes measured her as though she were an unexpected parcel. "Early for devotion, Pani," he said in Polish. His voice was dry, the voice of a man who had swallowed too much incense. "I find the Almighty keeps country hours," Miss Marple replied in careful French. She had discovered long ago that French was the universal solvent of European reserve. Kazimierz gave a thin smile and turned the key. The lock protested like an old hinge in a ghost story. Inside, the cathedral breathed cold stone and candle wax. The nave stretched ahead, pillars rising into darkness like the boles of a petrified forest. A single lamp glowed before the high altar. Elsewhere, shadows pooled thick as ink. Miss Marple took a seat in the rearmost pew, opened her prayer book, and appeared to read. In fact, she observed. Kazimierz moved about his duties with the economy of long practice, lighting candles, straightening hassocks, flicking dust from the brass lectern with a turkey feather brush. His footsteps echoed, then faded as he disappeared into the sacristy. A moment later, the faint clink of thurible chains drifted back. At 6:30, the first worshippers arrived. 2 elderly women in black, a student with a satchel, a tram conductor still in his cap. Father Stanisław entered from the side door, genuflected, and began the low mass. His voice was a thread, but the Latin rolled out with the confidence of habit. Miss Marple noted again the tremor in his hands as he raised the host. Noted, too, the way Kazimierz hovered at the entrance to the crypt stairs, keyring jingling softly against his thigh. Mass ended. The congregation dispersed into the brightening morning. Miss Marple lingered, pretending absorption in the carved misericords. When the cathedral was empty save for the verger and the priest, she slipped down the side aisle toward the chapel of the Black Madonna. The iron grille was locked. Beyond it, stone steps spiraled into darkness. A notice in Polish and Latin warned that the crypt was closed for restoration. Kazimierz appeared at her elbow, as silently as a shadow. "The crypt is not safe, Pani. The air is bad. The stone's loose. I was admiring the grille," Miss Marple said mildly. 17th century, I should say. The lock is newer. "Installed after the war," he replied. "The old one was stolen by the Germans for scrap." He jingled the keys again, a nervous habit. "Only 3 exist. Mine are the canon treasurer's and Father Stanisław's. No duplicates." Miss Marple smiled her small, disarming smile. "A great responsibility." Kazimierz shrugged. "I have carried it 40 years. The cathedral trusts me." He moved away to snuff the candles. Miss Marple watched the bunch of keys, 5 in all, each tagged with a scrap of red tape. The largest was the grill key. The smallest, she guessed, opened the reliquary safe in the sacristy. She made a mental note and returned to the palace for breakfast. The dining room was warm with the scent of coffee and fresh rolls. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, wrapped in a dressing gown the colour of ripe aubergines, was attacking a plate of scrambled eggs as though they had insulted her. "Jane, you've been abroad already. Sophia says the cathedral is positively sinister before sunrise. Did you see any ghosts?" "Only the living," Miss Marple replied, pouring tea. "The verger is devoted, the priest is nervous, and the locks are modern." The Countess entered, regal in navy silk. "You must forgive Ariadne's fancies. She is plotting a novel about a murdered sacristan, and cannot decide whether the weapon should be a candlestick or a crucifix." "Both are traditional," Miss Marple murmured. Breakfast proceeded. The other guests drifted in, Miss Evelyn Harper in a cloud of Chanel and mink, complaining that the coffee was not strong enough to wake a corpse. Mr. Leonard Stokes, her secretary, neat as a pin, making notes in a leather-bound diary. Dr. Helena Voss, the Viennese restorer, lighting her first cigarette of the day. Mr. Rupert Blaine, the antiquarian, polishing his monocle and discoursing on the superiority of Gothic over Renaissance silver. The meal was interrupted by a commotion in the hall. The footman announced Inspector Jan Kowalski of the Kraków police. He was young, fair-haired, with the alert eyes of a man who had learned to expect the worst. His English was fluent, his manner brisk. "Countess, I regret the intrusion. There has been an incident at the cathedral." The Countess rose. "Kazimierz." The inspector inclined his head. "Found in the crypt an hour ago. Strangled. The key to the grill is missing." A collective gasp rippled around the table. Miss Harper clutched her pearls. Dr. Voss exhaled smoke through her nose like a dragon. Mr. Blaine's monocle dropped with a ping. Miss Marple set down her cup. "May we see the crypt, Inspector?" Kowalski hesitated. "It is not pleasant, Panny." "I have seen unpleasantness before," Miss Marple said gently, "and I breakfasted lightly." The inspector capitulated. They walked in a silent procession through the cloisters, the Countess leading, Mrs. Oliver clutching Miss Marple's arm. The cathedral was already cordoned off. 2 uniformed officers stood guard. Kazimierz's body lay where he had fallen, beneath the lowest stair of the crypt. He was on his back, arms flung wide as though in supplication. The silver thurible cord, taken from the chapel above, was knotted tight about his throat. His eyes stared at the vaulted ceiling. His tongue protruded slightly, dark as a plum. Miss Marple knelt, heedless of the damp stone. The cord had bitten deep. The skin was bruised purple. She noted the angle of the knot, left-handed work. Kazimierz's right hand was clenched. When she gently opened the fingers, a single strand of mink fur lay in the palm, caught on a broken fingernail. Inspector Kowalski crouched beside her. "No sign of struggle. He knew his killer. Or trusted him," Miss Marple said. She pointed to the floor. "Scuff marks, 2 sets. 1 small heel, 1 larger, repaired sole. The larger print is deeper here." She indicated the stair, as though someone stood behind him, perhaps speaking softly before the cord was slipped over his head. Kowalski's eyebrows rose. "You have experience in such matters." "In human nature," Miss Marple corrected. "The rest follows." They searched the crypt. The air was thick with the smell of earth and candle smoke. Sarcophagi of long-dead bishops lined the walls, their effigies worn smooth by centuries of pilgrim fingers. In one corner stood a wooden crate marked Fragile, Dr. Voss's restoration materials. A smear of charcoal ash dusted the lid. Upstairs, the chapel of the Black Madonna was untouched, but the thurible hung askew, its chain shortened by the length of the murder weapon. Father Stanisław knelt before the altar, rocking slightly. When the inspector approached, the priest looked up with the eyes of a hunted deer. "My key is in my room," he whispered. "I swear it." Kowalski dispatched an officer to the presbytery. The countess wrung her hands. Kazimierz had no enemies. He was a mouse of a man. "Mice nibble secrets," Miss Marple said softly, "and secrets nourish cats." The search of the presbytery yielded the second key beneath Father Stanisław's mattress, wrapped in a silk handkerchief embroidered with the Tarnowski crest. The priest was taken away for questioning. The cathedral was sealed. Outside, the October sun climbed, indifferent to the drama below. Miss Marple lingered in the cloisters, her mind turning like a slow wheel. 3 keys, 1 missing, a strand of mink, a repaired soul, charcoal ash, and a priest who trembled at shadows. She looked up at the cathedral's silent towers. Somewhere within, a bell had not rung for 300 years. Yet the silence, she thought, was louder than any peal. Chapter 3. The American Heiress. The Countess's drawing room had been arranged for mourning, though no one had yet declared it so. Black silk drapes were drawn across the tall windows. Only a single lamp burned on the pianoforte, throwing a cone of light over the Persian rug. The guests sat in a half-circle, as though posed for a photograph no one wished to take. A samovar hissed gently on the sideboard, ignored. Outside, the Vistula wind rattled the panes like an impatient creditor. Inspector Kowalski stood with his back to the fireplace, hands clasped behind him. He had removed his hat, but not his gravity. "I require statements from everyone who entered the cathedral after Compline last evening. The verger was alive at 10. The night watchman found him at 5. That leaves 7 hours unaccounted for." Miss Evelyn Harper occupied the largest chair. Her mink coat draped over the back like a sleeping animal. She dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief the size of a postage stamp. "I was in bed by 9, Inspector. Jet lag is a tyrant. Leonard will confirm." Mr. Leonard Stokes, perched on a stool with his notebook open, gave a precise nod. Miss Harper retired at 8:53. I locked her door at 9:07 and retired to my own room adjacent. I heard nothing until the maid screamed at 6. Dr. Helena Voss leaned against the window frame, cigarette glowing. "I worked in the Sigismund Chapel until 11. The scaffolding is treacherous after dark. I needed the moonlight. I saw no one save the canon treasurer, who was locking the reliquary safe." Mr. Rupert Blaine polished his monocle with a silk square. "I took a constitutional along the river at 10:30. The air clears the brain for cataloguing. I observed lights in the cathedral, 2, perhaps 3 windows, but thought nothing of it. Restoration never sleeps." Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, who had abandoned her novel for the livelier drama of reality, burst out, "And the Countess! Zofia, you were with us until midnight." The Countess inclined her head. "I played patience in the library until 12:15. The footman brought cocoa. I then retired. My room overlooks the courtyard. The gate was bolted at 11. Miss Marple, seated in a corner with her knitting, counted stitches and faces. 5 alibis, each neat as a parcel. Yet parcels could contain surprises. Inspector Kowalski turned to Father Stanisław, who had been released pending further inquiry, and now sat hunched on a straight-backed chair, rosary beads clicking between his fingers. "You claim to have been in the confessional until 10, then in your room. The key found beneath your mattress." "Planted!" the priest cried, voice cracking. "I'm a coward, not a killer. Someone wishes me disgraced." Kowalski's expression did not alter. "We shall see. For now, no one leaves Kraków." Miss Harper rose with a rustle of silk. "Inspector, I came to purchase a reliquary, not to be imprisoned in a medieval melodrama." "My lawyers will wait," Kowalski said firmly. "The reliquary of St. Stanislaus is missing from its niche. Coincidence, Pani?" Miss Harper's cheeks flushed beneath her powder. "I never touched the wretched thing. Casimir showed it to me yesterday afternoon. Thumb bone in gold, 14th century, exquisite provenance. I offered $20,000. He laughed and said the church does not sell its saints." Mr. Stokes cleared his throat. "Miss Harper instructed me to draft a letter to the Canon Treasurer, proposing a donation in exchange for the relic's loan to an American museum. The letter was never sent." Dr. Voss exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "The provenance is questionable. The casket is genuine, but the bone, plaster, I suspect. I intended to X-ray it next week." Mr. Blaine's monocle flashed. "Plaster? Preposterous! The tarnish on the gold is consistent with forgery," Dr. Voss interrupted. "Someone substituted the relic and planned to sell the original abroad." Miss Marple's needles clicked. "Kazimierz discovered the switch. That is why he died." Silence fell, thick as the incense in the cathedral. The samovar gave a sudden hiss. Mrs. Oliver jumped. Inspector Kowalski closed his notebook. "We searched the cathedral again at first light. Miss Marple, you will accompany me. Your eyes see what others miss." The party broke up in murmurs. Miss Harper swept out, mink trailing like a bridal train. Stokes followed with the diary. Dr. Voss crushed her cigarette in a saucer and lit another. Mr. Blaine lingered to examine a medieval ivory on the mantel. The Countess touched Miss Marple's sleeve. "Walk with me in the gallery. I need air that is not poisoned by suspicion." The long gallery ran the length of the palace, portraits of Tarnowski ancestors glaring down. Moonlight striped the parquet through high windows. The Countess stopped before a likeness of a 17th century magnate in armour. "My husband's great-uncle," she said. "He melted the cathedral bells for cannon. The silence is our penance." Miss Marple studied the painted face, arrogant, ruthless. "Penance is lighter when shared, Countess. Who profits if the reliquary vanishes?" The Countess's fingers tightened on her rosary. "The church is poor. The restoration fund is empty. A sale, discreet abroad, would pay for frescoes, roofs, the organ. But the Canon Treasurer is proud. He would never. Others might," Miss Marple said gently. "Pride is a brittle shield." They walked on. At the far end, a door stood ajar to the old library. Inside, a lamp burned low. Mr. Stokes sat at a desk writing furiously. He started when the door creaked, then relaxed. "Merely finishing correspondence," he said. "Miss Harper dictates at odd hours." Miss Marple noted the blotter, fresh ink, a smear of charcoal, and on the floor a single strand of mink darker than Miss Harper's. Chapter 4. The Missing Reliquary. The cathedral was colder than a tomb at dawn. Frost feathered the flagstones. The breath of the search party hung in pale clouds. Inspector Kowalski had brought 6 men, 2 photographers, and a dog that sniffed once at the crypt and refused to descend. Miss Marple, wrapped in a woolen shawl the colour of November mist, followed the inspector through the side door that Kazimierz had unlocked for the last time. They began in the chapel of the Black Madonna. The grille stood open, the thurible chain severed by the murder weapon dangled like a broken promise. The altar cloth was undisturbed, the candles guttered to stubs. Kowalski lifted the cloth. Beneath, the marble plinth where the reliquary had rested was bare save for a faint circle of dust and a single flake of gold leaf. "Removed between Vespers and Matins," he said. "The canon treasurer locked the safe at 9. The sacristan checked at 11. The thief had perhaps 2 hours." Miss Marple bent closer. The dust circle was perfect except for one smudge. Thumb-sized, the ball of a hand pressed in haste. "Gloved," she murmured, "but not carefully. And here." She pointed to a hairline scratch on the marble. The casket was dragged, not lifted. Heavy for a thumb bone. They moved to the sacristy. The safe, a squat iron box let into the wall, gaped open. The lock showed no violence. The key still turned smoothly. Inside lay velvet cushions indented with the shape of processional crosses, but the central hollow, lined in faded crimson, was empty. The canon treasurer, Bishop Maximilian, arrived breathless, his pectoral cross askew. He was a small man with the face of a worried sparrow. "I locked it myself," he insisted. "The key never leaves my person." He produced a chain from beneath his cassock. The 3rd key glinted, untouched. Kowalski's eyes narrowed. Then the thief used Kazimierz's key, or the priest's. "Impossible," the bishop snapped. "Kazimierz was devoted, and Father Stanisław. His hands shake too much to turn a key in the dark." Miss Marple asked mildly, "Who else has access to the sacristy, Your Grace?" The bishop hesitated. "The restorers. Dr. Voss has a pass key for her materials, and Mr. Blaine catalogues the silver twice a week, but they are scholars, not thieves." Scholars, Miss Marple reflected, were merely thieves with Latin. They searched the crypt again. The chalk outline of Kazimierz's body had been erased by shuffling boots, but the scuff marks remained. Kowalski measured them with a tape. Women's heel, size 36, men's Oxford, size 43, left sole repaired with a nail. Common enough in Kraków. Miss Marple knelt. Beside the larger print, almost obliterated, was a crescent of charcoal dust. Fine, sooty, the sort used to blacken fresco outlines. She collected it in an envelope with the care of a gardener saving seed. Upstairs, in the Sigismund Chapel, Dr. Voss's scaffolding rose like a gallows. Pots of pigment, brushes, a portable stove for heating size, everything in meticulous order except one drawer forced open. Inside lay a plaster cast of a thumb, roughly carved, the gold paint still wet. Dr. Voss, summoned from the palace, examined it without touching. "Not my work, crude. Someone copied the reliquary's interior to fool a casual glance." "Or to buy time," Miss Marple said. "The original is already across the border." Kowalski dispatched telegrams to the frontiers. The dog, bribed with sausage, was persuaded to sniff the scaffolding. It sat beside a coil of rope and barked once. The rope was new, manila hemp, the sort used by art handlers. A tag read "Property of Viennese Institute." Dr. Voss paled beneath her powder. My assistant must have left it. I was in Vienna last month." Miss Marple noted the frayed end, cut cleanly with a sharp blade. Long enough to lower a small casket from the bell tower, perhaps. They climbed the tower stairs, narrow and winding, the stone worn hollow by centuries of feet. The bell chamber was empty, the great bells long gone to Swedish cannon. Dust lay thick, undisturbed except for a path of footprints leading to the far wall. Behind a beam, wrapped in a cassock stiff with candle wax, lay the reliquary. It was exquisite, gold filigree, enamels the colour of pomegranate seeds, a crystal window revealing nothing. The thumb bone was gone, replaced by a twist of newspaper. Kowalski swore softly. The newspaper was yesterday's Kraków Gazette, folded to an advertisement for steamship tickets to America. Miss Marple unfolded it carefully. In the margin, in pencil, someone had scrawled, "Meet L.S. Midnight. Bring the bird." L.S. Leonard Stokes. The bird, slang for a valuable object smuggled in luggage. Downstairs, the bishop crossed himself repeatedly. "Blasphemy! The saint's bone profaned." "Or preserved," Miss Marple said. "Plaster is safer for travel than gold." They returned to the palace. Lunch was a silent affair. Cold meats, pickled herring, bread that tasted of sawdust. Miss Harper complained that the police had searched her trunks and found nothing but Parisian gowns. Mr. Stokes's diary had been confiscated. He sat white-lipped, shredding a napkin. Dr. Voss smoked 3 cigarettes in succession. Mr. Blaine discoursed on the ethics of relic trafficking until Mrs. Oliver threatened to brain him with the samovar. Afterwards, Miss Marple sought the Countess in the winter garden. Oranges grew in tubs. The air smelled of earth and citrus. The Countess was pruning a lemon tree with vicious snips. "They will arrest Father Stanislaw again," she said without looking up. "The newspaper, American connections, and the cassock came from the presbytery." "Someone is very clever," Miss Marple replied, "or very desperate. Tell me, Countess, who among your guests arrived after the reliquary was last seen?" The Countess considered. Miss Harper and Mr. Stokes came from Warsaw on Tuesday. Dr. Voss has been here a month. Mr. Blaine arrived Wednesday with a crate of books. "And the canon treasurer?" "He lives in the palace. His apartments are above the library." Miss Marple nodded. Convenient for midnight errands. That evening, Inspector Kowalski interviewed the staff. The footman who bolted the gate at 11 swore no one left or entered. The maid who brought cocoa to the Countess saw a light in the library at 12:30. Mr. Stokes, she thought, working late. Miss Marple slipped away to the library. The desk was tidy, the blotter clean, but in the wastepaper basket lay a scrap of manila rope, burnt at one end, and on the windowsill a smear of gold paint, still tacky. Chapter 5. The crypt speaks night had fallen hard over the Wawel, the sort of night that pressed against windows and found the cracks. The palace slept uneasily. Only the kitchen cat prowled, tail high, hunting shadows. Miss Marple did not sleep. At 11:30 she exchanged her dressing gown for a dark skirt and cardigan, pocketed her torch and ball of gardener's twine, and slipped down the servants' stair. The Countess had left the courtyard door on the latch at her quiet request. "A breath of air, my dear, nothing more." The Countess understood the value of silence. The postern gate to the cathedral grounds stood ajar. The night watchman had been persuaded to a glass of plum brandy in the porter's lodge. Miss Marple crossed the cloisters alone, her rubber-soled shoes noiseless on the stones. The iron grille was locked, but she had watched Kazimierz closely and knew the trick of the lower hinge. A folded page from Mrs. Oliver's manuscript served as a wedge. The gate sighed open. Inside, the nave was a cavern of darkness pricked by the red eye of the sanctuary lamp. She moved along the side aisle, counting pillars, until she reached the chapel of the Black Madonna. The grille here was fastened with a simple padlock, new, bought in the Rynek on Thursday, according to the hardware receipt in Kowalski's file. Miss Marple produced a bent hairpin and 30 seconds of patience. The lock clicked. She was in. The crypt stairs spiraled down, cold as a well. She paid out her twine, knotting it to the lowest bar of the grille. The air grew thick, tasting of earth and old bones. At the bottom, her torch beam picked out the scuff marks she had noted earlier. The woman's heel, the repaired Oxford. She followed them across the floor to the sarcophagus of Bishop Piotr Gamrat, died 1545. The lid had shifted a finger's breadth. A smear of fresh wax sealed the gap. Miss Marple wedged her torch between two stones and set her shoulder to the lid. It moved grudgingly, stone grinding on stone. Inside lay not a bishop, but a leather portmanteau, monogrammed LS in tarnished gold. She opened it with care. The thumb bone of St. Stanislaus, genuine, yellowed, still bearing the faint scent of myrrh, rested on a bed of cotton wool. Beside it, a forged passport in the name of Leonard Smith, a steamship ticket to New York, and a letter in Miss Harper's looping hand. The plaster bird is in place. Meet me in the tower at 1. Bring rope. We sail Friday. Miss Marple closed the case, heart ticking like her travelling clock. She had the bone, the proof, and footsteps on the stair. She extinguished the torch and stepped behind the sarcophagus. The beam of another light swept the crypt, pausing on the open lid. A woman's voice, low and furious. "Damn the man! He moved it!" Miss Harper, in a dark cloak mink collar turned up. She knelt, rummaged, swore again. Then a second figure, taller, male, the click of a repaired sole. "Empty," Stokes hissed. "Someone's been here." "Find them," Miss Harper snapped. "We can't leave without the bone." They separated, torches stabbing the darkness. Miss Marple pressed deeper into the shadow, twine taut in her hand. Stokes passed within a foot. She smelled his Macassar oil. He climbed the stairs to the chapel. Miss Harper lingered, listening. A third set of footsteps, lighter, hurried, descended. Dr. Voss, cigarette glowing like a firefly. "The police are at the gate," she whispered. "Kowalski suspects the tower. We have minutes." Miss Harper's laugh was brittle. "Then we take the plaster and run. The Americans won't know until Southampton." Miss Marple stepped forward, torch blazing. "They will know at the dock, my dear. Bones are weighed as carefully as diamonds." 3 faces turned, frozen in the white beam. Miss Harper's hand flew to her throat. Stokes dropped a coil of rope. Dr. Voss's cigarette fell, scattering sparks. "Miss Marple," Stokes stammered, "this is private research. Into felony," Miss Marple finished. "The portmanteau is evidence, the bone is safe, and Inspector Kowalski is indeed at the gate, with 6 men and a warrant." She raised her voice just enough. From the stairwell came the measured tread of official boots. Kowalski appeared, flanked by constables, revolver steady. "Leonard Stokes, Evelyn Harper, Helena Voss, you are under arrest for the murder of Kazimierz Nowak and the theft of a sacred relic." Miss Harper lunged for the portmanteau. A constable caught her wrist. The mink coat slipped to the floor, revealing a silk dress stained with gold paint. Stokes sagged against the wall, face the colour of putty. Dr. Voss lit another cigarette with shaking fingers. "May I explain?" Miss Marple asked mildly. Kowalski bowed. "The floor is yours, Panny." Miss Marple addressed the captives as though lecturing the Women's Institute. Kazimierz discovered the plaster substitute on Tuesday. He confronted Mr. Stokes in the crypt here, where you had hidden the original bone to collect later. Miss Harper provided the money in the market. Dr. Voss the technical skill to forge the casket's interior. You strangled Kazimierz with the thurible cord, left-handed Mr. Stokes, to implicate Father Stanisław, whose arthritis is in the right hand. You planted the priest's key beneath his mattress, using a handkerchief stolen from the Countess's linen press. The rope was to lower the portmanteau from the tower window to a waiting boat on the Vistula. But Kazimierz had already moved the bone to the sarcophagus for safekeeping, intending to expose you at matins. She opened the portmanteau, lifted the bone reverently. "Here is your bird. The plaster decoy bought you time, but not enough." Stokes found his voice. "The priest, he trembled. He was perfect." "Perfect scapegoat," Miss Marple agreed. "But guilt trembles too, Mr. Stokes. You mistook one for the other." Kowalski snapped handcuffs. Miss Harper spat curses in English and Polish. Dr. Voss merely shrugged, as though arrest were another restoration project. The constables led them up the stairs. Miss Marple followed, twine coiled neatly in her pocket. At the grille, she paused. The Black Madonna's painted eyes seemed to watch, serene and ancient. Miss Marple genuflected, bone cradled in both hands. "Forgive them," she murmured. "They knew not what. They profaned." Outside, the first pale streak of dawn touched the spires. The cathedral remained silent, but the crypt had spoken, and its voice was enough. Chapter 6. The Unmasking. The Countess's drawing room had been transformed into a tribunal. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn back to admit the pale afternoon light. The fire crackled with unnecessary vigour. Every chair was occupied, every face arranged in the stiff attitudes of people who have been summoned to judgment and would rather be elsewhere. Inspector Kowalski stood before the mantel, notebook closed, revolver holstered. The drama required no further props. Miss Marple entered last, the reliquary cradled in a linen napkin as though it were a newborn. She placed it on the pianoforte beside her ball of twine, and a single mink hair mounted on a calling card. The room smelled of beeswax, tension, and the ghost of Dr. Voss's cigarettes. "Before we begin," Kowalski announced, "the bone has been examined by the bishop's physician. Genuine. The plaster substitute is in police custody. Confessions will shorten the proceedings." Miss Harper, wrists bandaged from the handcuffs, sat bolt upright in lavender silk. "I demand my consul." "You shall have him," Kowalski said, "after the truth." Mr. Stokes, collar askew, stared at the carpet as though it might open and swallow him. Dr. Voss had refused a chair. She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, a study in Viennese detachment. Mr. Rupert Blaine polished his monocle with mechanical precision. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver clutched a pencil, prepared to take notes for a chapter she would never write. The Countess, pale but composed, poured tea no one drank. Miss Marple took the central chair, arranged her skirt, and began in the tone she reserved for parish council meetings. 4 people planned a theft. 1 man died to conceal it. Let us be precise. She lifted the reliquary. This casket is 14th century Augsburg work, Gold, enamel, rock crystal. The bone within is older, 11th century, verified by the fracture lines. On Tuesday, Dr. Voss, under cover of restoration, replaced the bone with plaster and painted the interior to match. She left the casket in its niche. The substitution would not be noticed until the next inventory in Advent. Dr. Voss inclined her head. Correct. The X-ray would have exposed me, so speed was essential. Mr. Stokes, Miss Marple continued, forged provenance papers in the library. He used the Countess's stationery and the Canon Treasurer's seal, impressed from a wax sample taken during cataloguing. The buyer in New York, Miss Harper's cousin, expected delivery by Friday's sailing. Stokes muttered, he paid $50,000 in advance. Miss Harper's eyes flashed. Leonard promised it was harmless. Alone, he said. The church would never miss one bone among thousands. Kazimierz missed it, Miss Marple said gently. He polished the reliquary daily. He noticed the weight difference on Wednesday. He confronted Mr. Stokes in the crypt at 9:30 that evening. You were already there, Miss Harper, waiting with the portmanteau. Dr. Voss arrived at 10 to collect the plaster decoy and leave the rope for the tower descent. She turned to the antiquarian. Mr. Blaine, you provided the market intelligence, names, routes, prices. You took no active part, but you knew. Blaine's monocle fell. I merely advised. A scholar's duty is to truth, the Countess said coldly, not to profit. Miss Marple lifted the mink hair. Miss Harper's coat brushed the grill when she descended to the crypt. A single strand caught on Kazimierz's fingernail as he clutched at her sleeve. The scuff marks, her heel, Mr. Stokes's repaired Oxford, told the sequence. He stood behind the verger, speaking softly, while she watched the stair. The thurible cord was to hand. Mr. Stokes is ambidextrous. He writes with his right, but knots rope with his left, a sailor's habit from his university days. He looped the cord, pulled, and Kazimierz died without a cry. Stokes buried his face in his hands. The key, Miss Marple continued, was taken from Kazimierz's belt after death. Dr. Voss used it to open the sacristy safe and plant the priest's duplicate beneath his mattress, wrapped in a Tarnowski handkerchief to implicate the household. The newspaper in the tower was a blind. The real plan was the sarcophagus. She opened the portmanteau, removed the steamship ticket. Southampton to New York, first class, 2 berths. The bone was to travel as medical specimen. But Kazimierz, even in death, thwarted you. He had moved it Tuesday night, intending to confess at dawn. Inspector Kowalski stepped forward. The rope, the gold paint, the forged letter, all recovered. Dr. Voss's assistant in Vienna has been arrested. He cut the manila hemp to order. Mr. Blaine's correspondence with the New York buyer is in custody. Miss Harper laughed, a high, brittle sound. You have no proof I touched the cord. Miss Marple produced a second envelope. Fibers from the cord match the wool of your gloves, Miss Harper. You held Kazimierz's shoulders to steady him while Mr. Stokes strangled him. The gloves are in your dressing case, monogrammed E.H., with a burn mark from the thurible charcoal. Silence, absolute as the cathedral's bells. Kowalski gestured. 2 constables entered. Stokes rose without resistance. Dr. Voss stubbed her cigarette on the parquet and extended her wrists with a shrug. Miss Harper required assistance. Her knees buckled as the reality of iron settled on her skin. Mr. Blaine was led away last, protesting academic privilege. The door closed behind them. The Countess sank into a chair, rosary beads slipping through her fingers. And Father Stanisław? Innocent, Kowalski said. Released an hour ago. He will say Mass at Vespers. Mrs. Oliver exhaled. Jane, you are a marvel. I shall put you in a book, disguised, of course. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Please make me taller and younger, Ariadne, and give me a title. The fire settled into embers. Outside, the Vistula flowed on, carrying the city's secrets toward the sea. The reliquary gleamed softly on the pianoforte, restored to its proper indignity. A bone in gold, witness to human folly. Miss Marple gathered her twine, her envelopes, her quiet triumph. Another pattern unravelled, another web swept clean. She poured herself a cup of cold tea and drank it without tasting the bitterness. Chapter 7. The bells remain silent. Dawn broke over Kraków with the pale clarity of washed glass. The Vistula lay quiet, its surface filmed with mist. Gulls wheeled above the Wawel like white commas in an unfinished sentence. The cathedral's doors stood open for the first time in 3 days, and the scent of fresh incense drifted across the cloisters, mingling with the sharper tang of wood smoke from the city's chimneys. Father Stanisław celebrated the 7 o'clock Mass alone. His hands still trembled, but the tremor was gentler now, the tremor of a man who has carried a burden and found it lifted. He raised the host with the reverence due to a second chance. In the front pew knelt the Countess, veiled in black lace, rosary beads clicking softly. Behind her, Miss Marple sat with her prayer book closed on her lap. She had no need of printed words this morning. The reliquary had been restored to its niche before matins. The bishop himself locked the safe, pocketed the key, and announced that the plaster forgery would be ground to dust and scattered in the river. An exorcism of deceit. The newspapers carried headlines of theft and redemption. The American consul had already departed for Warsaw, muttering about international incidents. Miss Harper, Mr. Stokes, and Dr. Voss occupied separate cells in the old Austrian prison beneath the castle. Mr. Blaine had been released on condition of immediate return to England and permanent exclusion from Polish archives. After Mass, the Countess invited Miss Marple to the winter garden. The oranges glowed like small suns in their tubs. A lemon had ripened overnight, bright as a coin. "You leave tomorrow," the Countess said. It was not a question. "The Warsaw train at noon," Miss Marple confirmed. "Mrs. Oliver insists on accompanying me to Vienna. She claims the food is better for inspiration." The Countess smiled, the first unguarded smile Miss Marple had seen. "You gave us back more than a bone panny. You gave us silence without shame." "Silence is only shameful when it hides truth," Miss Marple replied. She accepted a cup of coffee, strong and black. "Tell me, Countess, did you suspect from the first?" "I suspected everyone and no one. A house full of strangers, a cathedral full of secrets. My ancestors would have called it Tuesday." The Countess turned the lemon in her fingers. "But you saw the pattern where I saw only threads." "Threads are my speciality," Miss Marple said modestly. "One learns, in a village, that a dropped stitch travels." They sat in companionable quiet until the footman announced Inspector Kowalski. He entered hat in hand, the briskness softened by fatigue. "The confessions are signed," he reported. Stokes strangled the verger. Harper held him. Voss planned the forgery. Blaine knew, but did not act. He will be deported. The bone will remain in Kraków. "And the cathedral?" the Countess asked. Open to pilgrims at 10. The Black Madonna has a new garland, roses from the convent garden." Kowalski bowed to Miss Marple. "Pani, Poland owes you a debt. If ever you return, I shall bring stronger wool," Miss Marple said. "October is treacherous." He laughed, clicked his heels, and departed. At 9, Miss Marple walked once more through the cloisters. The stones were warming under the sun. A sparrow bathed in the fountain. Kazimierz's replacement, a young seminarian with earnest eyes, unlocked the grille with a brand-new key. He blushed when Miss Marple complimented his punctuality. In the chapel of the Black Madonna she paused. Fresh candles burned. The plaster dust was gone. The Madonna's painted gaze seemed less severe, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders as well. Miss Marple laid a small posy of Michaelmas daisies, gathered from the palace border, before the altar. "Rest quietly, Kazimierz," she murmured. "Your watch is over." She climbed the tower stairs one last time. The bell chamber was empty, the ropes long rotted to frayed ends. From the highest window she looked down. The river curved like a silver ribbon. The city roofs glinted, the trams clanged along their tracks. Somewhere below, a child laughed. Life, insistent as bindweed, pushed through the cracks of tragedy. Back in the palace, her suitcase waited in the hall. Mrs. Oliver descended in a flurry of scarves and manuscripts. "Jane, I've decided the murderer must be a contessa with a poison samovar. Much more original." "Originality is overrated," Miss Marple said. "Truth is quite dramatic enough." The Daimler carried them to the station through streets already busy with Saturday marketing. Women in headscarves balanced baskets of apples. A priest hurried past with a missal under his arm. A tram bell rang like a distant memory. At the platform, the Countess pressed a small parcel into Miss Marple's hands. Pinitsky, heart-shaped gingerbread, wrapped in tissue. "For the journey," she said, "and for the village. Kraków ginger is famous for keeping secrets sweet." The train pulled out at noon precisely. Miss Marple watched the Wawel recede, spires pricking the sky, until it was no larger than the postcard that had summoned her. She opened her notebook for the last entry. Case closed. Motive, greed. Method, substitution and strangulation. Moral, a bone is only a bone until faith makes it priceless. P.S. Check left-handed knotting in future. She closed the book, unwrapped a gingerbread, and bit into spice and history. The bells of Kraków rang for the Angelus, every bell but those of the silent cathedral, which kept their counsel as they had for 300 years. Miss Marple smiled at the window's reflection. A small grey-haired woman with sharp eyes and a half-finished scarf. Another pattern complete, another journey begun,